The British Bulldog had a storied career in WWF before the Montreal Screwjob took place in 1997. What isn't really spoke about though is the downward spiral of Bulldog's personal and professional life in the years that followed. In this video, we will look at the late career of Davey Boy Smith, which turned out to be a sad reminder of the tragedies that plagued pro wrestling during this era. Davey Boy Smith won titles within the WWF in 3 decades, from the 1980s right to the 2000s. He was the inaugural WWF European Champion and holds the record for the single longest reign of the title. Prior to finding singles success, Smith achieved stardom as one half of the British Bulldogs tag team, alongside his cousin Tom Billington, the Dynamite Kid. Smith first worked in the WWF from 1984 to 1988, then joined the company once again in 1990 after stints in All Japan Wrestling and Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling. Davey Boy trademarked the British Bulldog name and returned to the WWF using that name. Personal problems with Dynamite Kid had already been brewing, and the animosity raised when Davey Boy Smith took their tag team name for himself. It's been said that Davey didn't contact Dynamite Kid again after Dynamite appeared in Bulldog's corner in a few matches in the UK. Upon Smith's return, he looked incredibly different. He now had long braided hair, and he had bulked up considerably. His new huge physique was gained in a very short time, leading people to correctly assume that Davey Boy Smith was taking steroids. In 1992, a jury convicted a local physician of selling steroids to several WWF wrestlers. As big a star as he was at the time, when Davey's name surfaced in a federal probe of human growth hormone traffickers later that year, the WWF told him his services were no longer required. It was reported that both Davey Boy Smith and the Ultimate Warrior walked out of the company by Dave Meltzer, but both Bret Hart and WWE producer Bruce Pritchard confirmed that both Ultimate Warrior and Bulldog were fired. This was the same year also that Bulldog sold out Wembley Stadium for SummerSlam. Speaking of SummerSlam in 1992, Bret Hart wrote in his book that Bulldog was high on crack leading up to the match. According to Bret, Bulldog was a physical and emotional wreck going into the famous IC title match at SummerSlam in Wembley Stadium. The match did turn out better than what both men could have hoped, and has become one of the classics in WWE lore. After getting fired by WWE, Bulldog showed up in WCW in 1993, and he was featured as a main event wrestler. Smith even seemingly won the WCW World Heavyweight Championship from Vader on a tour of England in October 1993, though the decision was reversed. Bulldog was released from WCW after Davey got in trouble in a bar. A guy made advances towards Davey's wife Diana, and things didn't end well for him. In short, the guy ended up in a coma after hitting his head in the bar. This, along with the fact Bulldog didn't draw well in UK WCW shows, resulted in his WCW release. The court case hung over Bulldog for years and caused him a certain degree of anxiety and stress. Upon Davey's return to the WWF in 1994, he would team with Lex Luger, join brother-in-law Owen Hart in a successful tag team, become a member of Camp Cornette, and finally join the Hart family to reform a new version of the Hart Foundation. Some of Bulldog's work in 1996 and 1997 was quite good, including his work against Shawn Michaels, his tag matches against Doug Furnas and Phil LaFawn, and his match against Owen in the European title tournament. The Montreal Screwjob then happened, and Bulldog quit the WWF to follow Bret Hart in joining WCW, the second time Bulldog would be employed by World Championship Wrestling in his career. Davey Boy suffered a serious injury at Fall Brawl 98 during a tag match featuring Bulldog and Jim Neidhart versus Disco Inferno and Alex Wright. During the match, while taking bumps, Smith twice landed awkwardly on a trapdoor that had been set up underneath the ring canvas to enable the Ultimate Warrior to make a dramatic entrance in the night's main event. The result was a spinal infection that nearly paralysed Davey Boy Smith, putting him in hospital for 6 months. While recuperating, Smith received a FedEx informing him that his contract had been terminated. Following this serious back injury, Smith then battled an addiction to morphine and pain-killing drugs. Quote Davey Boy Smith's wife Diana Hart, "My marriage survived Tom Billington, and it survived steroids. It just couldn't survive that damn morphine." Davey Boy's wife Diana had become disgusted watching her husband shake off his morphine stupors just long enough to shuffle from couch to bathroom and shoot up again. By late 1998, the couple had all but stopped speaking. Things were so bad at one point that Diana swallowed a handful of Xanax in a half-hearted suicide attempt, hoping to scare him straight. At that point, he finally agreed to check into a rehab clinic. But that failed when doctors, misinterpreting his night screams as a sign of detox, rejected his pleas for sedatives to blunt the stabbing pain in his back. 3 weeks later, he checked himself out and turned to old drug suppliers to help him self-medicate. After he returned to Calgary from his mother's funeral, an MRI proved that Davy wasn't inventing stories about his pain. He'd cracked a vertebrae and a staph infection was sweeping up his back. Doctors immediately checked him into Rocky View Hospital. Owen Hart, who had stayed with the WWF after Brett and Davey left, visited his old friend in hospital. It was shortly afterwards that Owen Hart died at the Over the Edge pay-per-view in Kansas. 3 months later, Vince McMahon met Davey Boy Smith in a New York hotel. Davey assured McMahon that he was clean, and McMahon, taking Davey Boy at his word, offered Davey a 4-year deal worth $450,000 annually. The British Bulldog returned to WWE in September '99, right in the midst of the Attitude Era. Bret Hart thrashed British Bulldog for going back to WWE in his column in the Calgary Sun. Bret felt that Bulldog going back to WWE was a betrayal to the Hart family, considering what had happened with Owen and also what had happened in Montreal. It was a very public feud. Bruce Pritchard said about the situation, "You don't want families fighting," but Bret was upset about the Montreal screwjob. No matter what anyone did or said, I don't think Bret looked after Bulldog in WCW. Bret cared about Bret. During this return run in the WWF in the Attitude Era, Davey Boy again fell off the wagon and turned back to drugs. It was decided that Davey would need to go into rehab in order to continue working for the company. Quote WWE producer Bruce Pritchard, "This was a real sad time. Bulldog was going through a really rough patch and had a dependency on pills. He showed up to work in a bad way, and he was on something. Myself and Jim Ross had to take Davey and sit him in the locker room. We tried to have a conversation with him, but he said he was fine while slurring his words and drooling. We wanted him to go to rehab, and when he comes out, we will have a job for him. But if he doesn't go to rehab, he doesn't have a job. We told him, you have to go right now. We had someone take him to the airport, and we took him to rehab that night. He was really upset. He didn't want to tell his family." WWE checked Davey Boy into rehab. He completed his time in rehab and came back to work, but this simply wasn't enough. It was decided that Bulldog needed time away from the company. WWE wanted the old Bulldog, and they said he could come back when he was in the right frame of mind, but at this point, Bulldog would not be allowed to step into a WWE ring in his current state. Quote Steve Blackman, who worked with Bulldog in one of his final matches, "I tried to protect myself because I was afraid Davey would drop me on my head. I ended the match as fast as I could and got the hell out." Later that year, Diana caught Davey shooting up in the garage of their home. At her wit's end, she called a lawyer and filed for a divorce. The staph infection that his doctors thought they had contained was now spreading into Davey Boy's legs. Because his divorce had left him isolated from the Harts, he was surprised when Diana's sister-in-law, Andrea, came to visit him in hospital. She returned the next day and the next, evidently finding a sympathetic ear for her own personal grievances against the Hart family. When Davey got out of hospital, the two began secretly seeing each other. In September, Andrea moved out of her home and into Davey's place. But if they were looking for comfort, they didn't find it. One day that fall, Andrea's estranged husband, Bruce Hart, tried to corner Davey outside his home. Davey sped away so fast on his motorcycle that he flipped headfirst over his handlebars, trying to avoid a car backing out of a driveway. There are literally thousands of stories about athletes who don't know when to give it up. Davey had wrestled since he was 12, so it's not surprising he couldn't imagine a life without it. Before his death on the 18th of May 2002, Smith had been training with the intent of resuming his career and had wrestled in 3 tag matches with his son, Harry Smith, the previous weekend. At the age of 39, Davey Boy Smith, the British Bulldog, died after suffering a heart attack while on holiday in British Columbia. An autopsy revealed past anabolic steroid use may have played a part in his death, but no certain reason was found. Bruce Hart claimed, quote, "Davey paid the price with steroid cocktails and human growth hormones." 2 funeral services were held for Davey, one by Andrea and one by the Hart family. Bret Hart attended both. A coroner concluded that Davey Boy Smith suffered a major heart attack but found that he was not intoxicated with any substances at the time of his death. The report did find evidence of past painkiller and anabolic steroid use, which led the coroner to conclude that prior drug use and stress played a role in his death. Even a year after the coroner's report was released, Davy Boy Smith's father was certain that Dave had been murdered. No proof and no foul play has ever surfaced. Davy's father argued that his son was too fit and healthy at the time of his death, and it didn't make any sense. It was revealed in the weeks prior to Davy Boy Smith's death that WWE were keeping tabs on him and his son Harry Smith. Reports coming into WWE said that Davy was in good shape and was healthy. WWE envisioned Harry and Davy coming into the WWE together, but this unfortunately never happened. Ultimate Warrior made a scathing blog post when Davy passed away. Quote Warrior, "I think it's more sorry than sad. Sorry because Davy let circumstances control him instead of digging down and conquering the circumstances of the challenges set before him. You abuse something long enough, it gets revenge. Make no mistake about it, Davy died at 39 years of age because he chose to. The choices he was making led him to an early death. He, and he alone, killed himself prematurely. But few want to accept that that's true." Davy was a drug abuser, not just a drug user. Just because you ingest prescription drugs instead of non-prescription drugs doesn't decrease your chances of becoming one any less. Although, when I was at WCW, it was even revealed to me that Jim Neidhart, that Davy and he regularly smoked crack. Bret Hart also revealed in an interview that Bulldog's problems stopped him from becoming an even bigger star in the WWE. Quote Bret, "He had the whole world in front of him when he beat me at Wembley in 1992. But his drug problems started to become more apparent all the time. If he could have maybe turned those around, he could have been that top star."